So this is the Rocky Flats Cold War Museum Oral History Project. This is Gene Ideker. My name's Hannah Nordhaus, and it is the 4th of November, 2003. And we're recording, and we're at Gene's house in Wheatfield.
Lakewood.
Lakewood, that's right. Wheatfield, Wheat Ridge, I was thinking. Lakewood. Okay, so let's get started. If we could just start with a little personal background, where you grew up, what your parents did, where you were educated, and where you met your wife, that sort of thing.
Okay, well, I was born and raised in Iowa, a little bit northwest of Sioux City. My parents were farmers, and I decided very early on in life that farming wasn't my bag, and I had to do something else. So during high school and shortly thereafterwards, there was a small machine shop that done a lot of farm repair work called Conkle's Machine Shop, about 3 miles north of our farm. And I served my machinist apprenticeship there. And after graduating from high school, I went to Hinton High School. I went to college at Iowa State College in Ames. I did not graduate because I was drafted and went into the service, into the Air Force, and that is where I met my wife. I met Virginia in Washington, D.C. She was working for the Navy, and I was stationed at Andrews Field, Maryland. And then when I got discharged, shortly after that, she returned home to Wichita, Kansas. I went back to Iowa, and she went back to Wichita. And we corresponded, and I went down to Wichita and saw her, and she came up to Iowa and spent Thanksgiving with us and met my parents. And then she got a job with General Electric out at the Hanford Works in Hanford, Washington. And so I went out to Hanford with her, and I went to work for Kaiser Engineers, and we were married then. We went out there in February of 1947, or 1948. We went out there in February of 1948, and were married in June of 48. And I worked, she didn't work much longer. She worked maybe another 6 or 8 months after we were married. And then we stayed in Richland until 1955. And in 1955, I was working on construction, and like all construction jobs, sooner or later you do get them finished. And I was looking for a job and got an offer from ACF Industries in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So we moved from Richland to Albuquerque, lived in Albuquerque from 1955 to 1968, and there after 68 is when we moved to Denver, and I went to work out at Rocky Flats.
So your training was in carpentry type stuff?
No, machinist. I was a machinist.
Okay.
And I took some engineering courses on the side, and some correspondence courses, and but I was pretty much in manufacturing all my life.
Okay. And how did you first learn about Rocky Flats?
Well, in the plant we were in Albuquerque, we were doing work for what was then the Atomic Energy Commission. And they decided to close that plant. And they divided the work up that was being done in that plant. And part of the work went to Bendix who was then in Kansas City, and part of it went to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and part of it came to Rocky Flats. And the part that came to Rocky Flats happened to be where I was working in Albuquerque. I was General Foreman over the manufacturing of this particular part of the weapon, and that was then that whole division, you might say, or all of that work was transferred to Rocky Flats. And 13 of us, there was 13 people from that had been working for ACF that was subsequently transferred to Rocky Flats, and I was fortunate enough to be one of those people.
What year was that again?
1968.
1968. So what part of the weapon were you manufacturing?
Well, I don't think it's classified any longer. In fact, I'm sure it's not. It was the high-pressure vessels is what they were. There's part of the weapons that need gas to do their particular whatever they eventually do, which we hope they don't ever. And these were booster bottles, they called them, and they were made primarily out of stainless steel. And in Albuquerque, they were called the J line. And the reason they called them the J line is they were a kind of a pet part of what we'd done in Albuquerque for our plant manager, whose name was Joshel. So we always called it Joshel's line, or the J line. And that name kind of stuck with it as it come to when they came to Rocky Flats.
And was that what you did? You work with the J line for your entire career?
Yeah. And well, then when I got to Rocky Flats, I was in the J line, and then shortly after the fire of 1969, I went over to the plutonium side, and I worked because they was trying desperately to get some machines up and to get to make what was called special order projects. And so they need some help getting some of the plutonium machines up and running. And I went over there, and then I stayed there getting Module C, or the machining module in Building 707, up and running. Mm-hmm. And then there was some changes in management, and I left when I was in the J line, and when I went over to the plutonium side, I was a general foreman. Mm-hmm. And then I got promoted to superintendent and went back to the J line. And I was in charge of all of the machining part of the J line product. And at that time there was dual supervision. There was a supervisor over the machining part of it, and a supervisor or a superintendent over the assembly part of it. Mm-hmm. And then in 1975, that was, I guess I went back over there. The fire was in 69. It was probably 71 when I went back to J line, something like that. And then in 1975, when Rockwell came in and Dow Chemical left, well, Rockwell done some more management structure changes, and I was made manager of both the assembly and the machining side of the house in the J-line project. And I stayed there in that until, it must have been, trying to recall now, the early to the mid 80s when they built Building 460. And then when they built Building 460, they picked two individuals to kind of run the project. They had a construction manager, a gentleman by the name of Ken Freeberg. And then they wanted a production manager to work with the construction people to be sure that the production was coordinated, the proper equipment got into the building, and there was a bonus involved for Rockwell that if we got the building built on time and got all the production machinery in there and started producing the product and didn't miss any schedules, Rockwell got a sizable bonus. And so Ken Freeberg and I worked very close together and were successful in doing that, with one exception. We did miss one schedule for which Rockwell was penalized $90,000, I think it was, that was cut off their bonus. But and that is the building of 460 and the movement into Building 460, and everything that went on with that project was the highlight of my career. Of all the things I'd done before and after that, there was nothing that I enjoyed more than I did that. We were very proud of that. Everybody that worked on that project done a great job.
And so did you stay in Building 460 for the rest of your
Yeah, then I stayed in Building 460 until, it was probably about 1987, something like that, I think. My boss was a young man, a PhD metallurgist, a graduate from Ohio State by the name of Clarence Widener. Probably the most intelligent person that I ever associated with. Just a dynamic young man, but he got cancer. And when he started his treatment, he asked me to be acting. His title was Director of Production Operations. And he asked me to be acting Director of Production Operations because he was off an awful lot. We had a plant manager that time by the name of Dom Sanchini, and Clarence, his health just continued to fail, and he passed away then, and I think that was in probably mid '87, something like that. And then at that time I was made Director of Production Operations permanently, and I left Building 460, and my office for a little while was in Building 441, and then I was not really because I wanted to, but because the boss insisted on it, I had to move to Building 111, which they called it. In those days, they called the head shed, So then I was in Building 111 for a couple of years. Yeah.
Since and then that's where that you remained Director of Production.
Yeah, then I stayed as Director of Production Operations until And then when Rockwell left in 1990, and EG&G came in at the January 1st of 1990, Rockwell actually left the latter part of 89, why I stayed on with EG&G. But I could see politically that I didn't fit with the EG&G regime. And I thought to myself, you know, you've enjoyed your career at Rocky Flats. Don't leave with a bitter taste in your mouth. So before I got totally upset, why I retired. I retired in March, I think it was March of 2000. And shortly after that, I was called and they wanted to know if I would work as a contractor on a consultant basis. And, well, after I retired, I knew I had to do something to kind of get Rocky Flats out of my system. So Virginia and I went to Europe for a month. And when we returned, why, I started getting these phone calls. So finally I said, okay, I'll go out. So I went out and I worked on a part-time basis a few hours a week, not a whole lot. And then, and I can't remember exactly the months or the dates, but EG&G brought in a new general manager by the name of Jim Zane, and he just cleaned house of the EG&G top management that was there. Virtually, he got rid of most all of them. And he called me at home one day and asked me if I would consider coming back on a permanent basis. And I really didn't, I'd been gone and, you retired and I wasn't really ready to go back. But finally, after a number of phone calls and, one of these offers you can't refuse, I went back, and I went back as the Associate General Manager of Non-Plutonium Operations. And so I was responsible for, at that time, what we called the whole south side of the plant. There was no plutonium involved. It was stainless steel, beryllium, uranium, and that kind of stuff. Because even though they had stopped making triggers or pits or whatever they want to call them now, but there was still a considerable amount of manufacturing going on in the non-plutonium part of the business, because these pressure vessels, or these bottles that we built, had a life cycle. They were filled with a gas that, as the gas aged, it decayed, and then when it decayed, it expanded. So it increased the pressure inside of these bottles. So some of them were only good for 4 years, and the life cycle was between 4 and 8 years. So you had to continually manufacture these to replace them. So there was a lot of that business still going on. So I had that responsibility to see that manufacturing continued, and there was quite a bit of it, and we had some pretty tight schedules to make. So I remained at that then for, let's see, I told Zane when I went back that I'd come back and for a year, but I ended up I'd stay in 3 years. And I guess about a year and a half into that 3 years, then I was made deputy general manager of the whole plant. And I stayed at that then, of course, till I retired the second time.
Okay. Now, you had said you retired in March of 2000. Did you mean in March of 1990?
No. Yeah, 90. I'm 10 years off, I'm sorry. 1990. Yeah, and then I went back, in the middle of 1990, and then the second time I retired was about the middle of 93. Yeah,
Okay.
10 years off.
Get that one straight. Since you talked a lot about the buildings and you were in so many, we have sort of towards the end of this a list of questions about the buildings. And I wonder if we could go back to the beginning of your career, maybe tell me if the experience of coming to work at Rocky Flats. It sounds like you had been in similar environments in Albuquerque and in Washington.
No, well, in the state of Washington, up in Washington, I was strictly on construction.
Not at Hanford?
Yeah, it was at Hanford. It was at the Hanford plant, but we were. I worked for Kaiser Engineers, and it was strictly construction. Now in Albuquerque, with ACF, again, we're building components for nuclear weapons, but it was all cold. It was all aluminum, magnesium, lead, stainless steel, no radioactive materials at all in Albuquerque. So coming to Rocky Flats was really a new experience because it was the first time that I had to, wear disseminated badges, and the security was much tighter up here at Rocky Flats than it was at ACF. And I started in building 881, which at one time was an Ori building, and some of it was redone to accept this work that came up from Albuquerque, and it was underground. And no windows. If you wanted to know what the weather was like, you had to go outside.
Is that the one that was way underground?
Yeah.
A bunker and many floors down.
Yeah, and it had the south side of it. It was constructed so it had a blowout wall, and the south side of it was open, but all the rest of it was underground. But and there was so much to learn coming to Rocky Flats because of the dealing with radioactive material. And I guess my first real experience with it was right after the fire, '69, and when I went over and worked on the plutonium side. I went into 776, 777, the two buildings that were involved in the fire. I went in there about within a week after the fire, and I mean, it was weird in there, no lights, and and you knew that it was so radioactive that it was almost to infinity. It was so the environment at Rocky Flats, the working environment, was much different than anything I had experienced before.
Did that take some getting used to?
Oh, yes, it sure did, you know. And then one of the most difficult parts of it was as a result of the media and all of the publicity was when you'd come home at night and your neighbors would actually kind of shun you in a way. You know, I wasn't the most popular guy in the neighborhood. Not because people disliked me. It was because people disliked Rocky Flats, and they didn't understand it. You know, they'd question you whether you were bringing any of that stuff home with you, and this neighborhood is a very stable neighborhood. In fact, the people that live across the street moved in a week before Virginia and I did, and the people that live north of us here have lived here for, well, this house was, I think, like 5 years old when Virginia and I bought it, and Ed and Shirley, they've lived there ever since. They bought their house new, so, you know, of course, you know, that's all changed, and we're great friends now, you know. But there was a time when if you worked at Rocky Flats, you weren't really accepted by everybody.
Now, is that from the beginning or more when the
After the fire? After the fire, yeah.
So,
see, in the beginning, well, I can remember because I was working out at ACF down in Albuquerque, and we had some people then that moved up here. Rocky Flats, when it was built, was welcomed with open arms by the city of Denver because you know, there was a big employment. You know, it was a great place to work. The wages were above the average that the people here in Denver were getting, but the fire changed all that, you know.
So before the fire, did your neighbors know much about Rocky Flats?
No, there was hardly ever mentioned,
Right.
you know. There's a lot of things that made working at Rocky Flats difficult. One of them was you could never talk about the day with your wife or your family. You know, you come home and of course fortunately Virginia had worked that short time up at Hanford, so she understood. You know, so that was. You know, that helped me a lot. Probably the most difficult part of working at Rocky Flats was the fact that you were spending your life building something that you hoped was never used. Now, that's altogether different building automobiles or wash machines or something like that. And there's a lot of times you had to, you know, kind of talk to yourself, and you had to convince yourself that if you didn't do it, that somebody else would, because it was going to go on. But psychologically, there was times when you wondered why you were doing this. And I'm sure I'm not alone. I'm sure everybody that worked out there had those kind of thoughts, you know, at one time or another. But, you know, it was more than a job. And I think even the union people felt that it was more than a job. I know that we had some difficulties. There was difficulties with the union. We had a big strike. I think it was in '70 that they had a big strike. But still, I think that we felt there was some togetherness, you know, and you had to feel that way, you know. Otherwise, it would have been virtually impossible to have worked out there. But I know, you used to get a lot of needling about glowing in the dark and, you know, all that stuff. In 1985, I was exalted ruler of my Elks Club. And so one night, at the lodge meeting, I had them turn out all the lights. And it got dark in there, and I said, I want everybody that worked at Rocky Flats to stand up. So they all did. And I says, now, do anybody, the rest of you guys see any of us glow in the dark? and that was the end of that at the Elks Club. But, yeah, you got a lot of that.
Interesting. Okay, so we were talking about the buildings, and you were saying how different it was than your other work environments, and then how difficult it was. I guess it sounds like you worked in so many different buildings, but if you could describe a typical day at work in terms of what involved getting in and out of the buildings, the security checks, badges, different clothing that you put on and off, that sort of thing.
Well, on the south side of the plant, on the non-plutonium side, like in 881, when we worked in 881, of course, at that time, the outer perimeter of the plant had a badge check that you went through, and then also all of the areas, like this was the 800 area, they call it. They had fences around it, and you had to go through another badge check there. But as far as special clothing, in 881, you didn't have to wear any special clothing. Now, in 444 building, where they done the uranium and the beryllium, when you went out into the shop, in the uranium shop, the only special clothing you'd probably have to wear would be a smock and put on booties. In the beryllium shop, you'd have to wear a respirator. And that was because of the beryllium dust, not, because we did have a number of cases of berylliosis. Yeah, that was from the machining and of the beryllium and the dust before we see. There was, when this thing first started back in the 40s, the urgency to get a nuclear weapon was driven so hard that there was a lot of the safety precautions that should have been taken that weren't, and there was a lot of things that I think was kind of swept to the wayside, like the waste. Nobody worried about what she was going to do with the waste, etc. And see that all, and the same way with beryllium. Nobody really gave a lot of thought to the safety aspect of machining beryllium until beryliosis started surfacing.
When was that?
Well, I think our first experience with it must have been late 70s, early 80s. And then we worked very hard with National Jewish Hospital to develop testing and stuff for beryliosis. So in 444 building, you did have to wear a little bit of special clothing. But now in the 700 area, in the plutonium areas, at first, just if you were just kind of touring the place or something like that, you wore booties and a smock. If you were actually working, then you changed into coveralls. And then, of course, if you went into any place that was highly radioactive, why, you had to put on maybe 2 or 3 pairs of coveralls and full face mask with supplied air. And so it kind of depended how you dressed, kind of depended on the level of where you were working and the level of radioactivity and what was involved. Now the 771 building, the chemical building, I wasn't in that too much, so I really don't know what they all had to go through down there. But that was probably the most contaminated building at Rocky Flats.
With solvents and
771, yeah, that's because that's where all the chemicals were used, and there was a lot of radioactive work done in 771.
If you were handed blueprints of the various buildings that you were involved in, the as-built as they were originally built, and told and said this is how it was when it was taken down, would that be the case, or would you find that were there a lot of changes made that weren't reported? And
well, I think in the earlier days there were, because even now I know starting with 707, I think the as-built of 707 were probably 99.9% accurate, you know. I know 460, the as-built of 460 were. But I would imagine that when they started tearing down or decommissioning buildings like 881, and even some of the 400, 444, and some of them older buildings, I have an idea they could have run into some problems because the as-built weren't maintained as they should have been.
And that was because they'd make changes sort of on the fly, or
Well, yeah, I think they'd make some changes. See, the work control procedures was one of the things that Rockwell got into hot water with the government over, and I'm sure as you go back in time, the work control procedures weren't as stringent as they should have been, and there was changes made to facilities that never got to engineering, you know, and like you say, some of them were made on the fly. And now I don't know.
give examples.
Well, I know there were times that when we were digging trenches or something like that we run into pipelines and electrical lines that nobody knew they were there, So that was probably, as far as the structures themselves, I don't think there was ever any real problems. But some of the outside areas, there were problems.
And how about because you oversaw the processes of manufacturing, I imagine, did those evolve as people said, well, there's a better way to do it?
Well, yeah, but that was all very tightly controlled. Because if you made a change in a process, you actually, well, it kind of depends on the magnitude of the change, but if there's anything very significant, you had to get approval from the design agencies, from either Los Alamos or Lawrence Livermore labs, or Sandia labs. Those are the three labs that we done work for. And, that was one of the proud parts, or one of the things that I'll always remember of all of these bottles that we built. And we never had a failure in the field because of the manufacturing process. We had a few leakers because there was a problem with the material, but never with the way they were manufactured. And you had to control that because everything that went out with a set of documents that we call the bomb book, but that told exactly how this part was manufactured, how it was inspected, all the dimensional characteristics, and everything like that. And if you wanted to make a change in that process, you had to have it approved by the engineering department and by the quality department. So changes in manufacturing, there should never have been any surprises there.
So the specs never
No.
were changed.
No.
Now, what are leakers? They're
Well, when these bottles are filled with gas, you wouldn't want it to leak out because the gas was lethal. And some of these things went into weapons that went on submarines, and you wouldn't want to be 1,000 feet under the water and have one of these doggone bottles start leaking. Why, you'd kill everybody on the submarine.
Was it the gas?
The gas.
Well, what kind of gas was it?
Well, I don't think I should. I don't know if that's still classified or not. But
And so these weren't the pits. These were over.
oh no, these weren't. These were booster bottles. These bottles contained gas that boosted the pit to make the boom bigger. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Let's go back to some more general questions. I'm wondering if you could talk about the work environment at the plant and how it may have changed between workers, supervisors, and the contractors, and how that might have changed with the different contractors.
Well, just you had three. While I was there, we had three distinct different contractors. The first being Dow Chemical. Dow Chemical, if you wanted to go talk a chemical process with the people in the head shed, they could talk all day. But there very few of the while I was there for Dow, which was only 6 years, 6.5 years. Very few of the top echelon were manufacturing people. They were more chemical people. Then when Rockwell come in, it was just the opposite. Because Rockwell weren't chemists. Rockwell was manufacturing. So the environment changed 180 degrees between the two. And for me, it was a lot more fun and a lot easier working for Rockwell than it was for Dow Chemical. And I'm sure the people that was on the chemical side of the house felt just the reverse of that. Then when EG&G came in, they were kind of neither. They were administrators, you know. And the first wave of management that EG&G brought in was a number of retired Navy people. Because at the time that EG&G took over Rocky Flats was about the same time that Admiral Rickover was downsizing his nuclear navy. So there was a lot of naval officers that were nuclear people because they'd been on nuclear submarines, nuclear aircraft carriers, and et cetera, that were looking for jobs, and EG&G picked them up. So there was three distinct environments between the three contractors. Now, I can't speak for Kaiser Hill because I never worked for Kaiser Hill. But I had my biggest jobs with EG&G, but I had more fun working for Rockwell, and Dow Chemical. I made it through. I guess I don't know. It's about the best way to describe it.
And in terms of the work environment writ large for everybody, was it you talked about everybody was sort of a unit because
I think that Rockwell probably done the best job of management union relationship. I think the relationship during the Rockwell days, the 15 years they were there, was probably the best. There was some animosity between the union and the management of Dow Chemical. And of course, Dow Chemical also experienced the most of the protesting was done, in the early 70s after the fire. And then EG&G, I don't think the majority of the people that EG&G brought in, their top management people, had ever dealt with union people. And so there was some big mistakes made on both sides. And it was pretty tough. We had the national vice president of the steel workers was down to Rocky Flats several times when EG&G was there. Jim Kelly, of course, was very active. Pat Kelly, his brother, but and of course Rockwell never had no strikes. Dow Chemical had the big strike in 1970. So I think that working relationships were okay during the Dow Chemical days, were good during the Rockwell days, and because of all the state of confusion during the EG&G days of resumption and so many new people that we grew while it was in mass production in the 80s. I think we had at the most 3,500 people working out at the Rocky Flats. And then when they decided to shut it down, it all of a sudden grew to over 8,000. So there was a lot of confusion out there in the early '90s. So
And that was the cleanup crews coming in, or?
well, it was just so many. There was probably at least 5 administrative people to every worker. It was unbelievable it grew totally out of control. It was kind of like the fires in California, and there was no one person had a handle on it, and it not only grew with the contractor, it grew with the Department of Energy. Their workforce tripled in size virtually overnight, and it was, I don't think interesting is the word I want to use, but it was difficult because and when you grow like that, and when you got so many people involved, all of a sudden there's so many artificial barriers that you have to go through to get anything done. And there was a time there at Rocky Flats that it was just virtually impossible to accomplish anything. And but I mean, they got through it after about a year, but it was it wasn't a lot of fun, I'll tell you that.
I imagine there was some an immense amount of caution also because of the FBI raid and fear.
Oh yeah, the FBI raid, really started the downhill trend of, and it was. Well, I suppose everybody has their opinion, but I thought it was a terrible way of handling things, There was no consideration given to anyone that worked at Rocky Flats. The FBI moved in, said they were going to do this, take over this. It really destroyed a lot of relationships at Rocky Flats, and virtually proved nothing. That was the sad part of it. But I wasn't, because the FBI raid pertained primarily to the plutonium side of the house and to the waste disposal and what they were doing with waste. I wasn't involved a whole lot in the FBI raid. They pretty well left my part of the business alone, and for which I was thankful. I had nothing to hide, but when you got twice as much to do as you can do, you don't want to be bothered with something like that either.
What's your memory of the raid? How'd you find out about it and that sort of thing?
The boss called us in, had a staff meeting, and told us that they were there. Nobody knew they were coming, or nobody knew. They just came, and they just took over parts of Building 111. With if they wanted your office, they just told you be out here by tomorrow morning. We're taking over this space. And but there was guys like Wayne Myers and Bill Weston and, of course, Dom Sanchini and those people that were involved with them all the time. But like I say, fortunately, I didn't have a lot to do with them.
Did you start out as a member of the union?
No. No, I was in the union for a while when I was on construction up at Hanford, but that's the only time I was in the union. Never was in the union. Had an awful lot to do with the union, and I served on the negotiating team 2 or 3 times at contract time when he was redoing the new contract. Yeah.
Did you feel that the union had much impact and importance at Rocky Flats?
Oh yeah. And I think for the most part, the union was pretty fair and pretty equitable to work with. There was some factions in the union that made it difficult. The radiation monitors they almost controlled the union, I felt a little sorry for the machinists and the tool makers and the welders, because they were really the minority in the union. So they had little to say about what went on. But the radiation monitors and the chemical operators were the big 2 very strong groups in the union. And the Kelly brothers, Pat and Jim, Officer Jim was president of the union for I don't know how long. But I think the union served a purpose. And it's very easy to be negative about the union, but I don't think in my career out there, I think the only really dumb thing they ever done was a strike in 1970.
Why was that dumb?
Well, it was at the time that production was low. They were out for, I think, like 11 weeks and gained nothing by it, because at that particular time the company, had nothing to lose. And it was just the timing of the strike was just not good at all. I think it took them a long time to recover from that, because you take without a paycheck for 11 weeks, a lot of people were hurting.
I'm gonna stop and put in a new tape.
Oh, okay.
We're already at an hour, so. It's still the 4th of November, 2003, and we're in Gene's house in Lakewood.
Right.
Wheatfield. And we were talking about the union, and we were specifically talking about the 1970 strike. And I actually had one more question on that, which was, what were they striking about?
Well, wages primarily is what they wanted more. They wanted to increase their wages, and I don't think it was much about benefits, because the benefits were awful good. They just wanted more money per hour, mostly.
But they didn't get what they wanted?
No. In fact, there was a number of their members that crossed the picket line and come back to work and which really weakened their position. And of course, when that happens, you don't never get over that, because you have the people that come back to work that are referred to as scabs, and there's always that division. That division remains forever in the workforce. You know, you might have been my friend yesterday, but you're not my friend today. You know, it's not a good thing. But, you know, inevitably, when a strike lasts that long, you have a certain amount of that, you know, because there's just people that have to, they need some money, you know, otherwise they lose their house, or, you know, the whole 9 yards.
Do you think that the union, in terms of safety, worker safety stuff, do you think they were a good force in keeping safety by safety?
Yeah, I do. I think that they were a plus. I think that they and it's like everybody, you know, not only union management does the same thing, at times go overboard. And, you know, the pendulum swings all in one direction or something. But I think they were a balancing force, you know, and I think without the union, there would have been some things that slipped through the crack that shouldn't have, you know. And we formed some safety teams of company and union folks, and would meet regularly and discuss safety questions. And I think that worked very well.
Let me skip to our safety questions, since we're talking about that already.
Okay.
I guess you discussed a little bit that there was a lot that people didn't know at the time, and with waste and stuff. In general, do you think that worker safety versus community safety, you think that the plant did a good job on both of those?
Oh yeah, I think if you would compare the possibilities of someone getting hurt or contaminated, if you would compare that to what takes place in private industry, you would be amazed at how much safer it was at Rocky Flats. Now, Dow Chemical, they had a safety program where you were awarded for so many, you know, every million man hours without a lost time injury. And they had a fantastic safety record. Rockwell didn't quite follow that same pattern. But to the best of my knowledge, in the 25 some years that I worked out there was only 2 fatalities. And one of them was a jogger hit by a car on the East Access Road, and the other one was an electrician that got electrocuted. Now, if you take that number of man hours that was involved at Rocky Flats and put it in private industry, you'll find that Rocky Flats was very safe and very concerned about the community. I think that Rockwell was probably, and that was because of some of the pressures that was starting to be apparent from the media, from the politicians, and from the community. Rockwell was probably more aware of what was happening in the community than Dow Chemical was, because Dow Chemical was kind of a tight-knit deal. But no, I don't think there was ever anything done at Rocky Flats that safety wasn't number one priority.
What about, did you, were you or any of your colleagues at work exposed to plutonium or beryllium solvents, that kind of thing?
Well, anybody that went into the facilities were exposed. And if you followed the precautions that were established, you never had any trouble. But there's always somebody that wants to bypass something, and you can't afford to do it in a place like that. If you try any shortcuts, you're going to get burnt. And of course, there was a few accidents out there that they're going to happen. Wherever you got human beings involved, why something like that's going to happen. But I don't know of any that ever happened because somebody was trying to cheat the system. I mean, there was some accidents that happened because probably of lack of training, lack of understanding of what you were dealing with. But I think in the most part, and the records will substantiate that, it was a very safe place to work.
What about long-term health impacts? We talked about borreliosis.
Well,
Exposure to everything.
we had a great program that if, especially in the plutonium side of the house, your badges were checked routinely. And if your body count got to such and such a level, you were moved out of the plutonium area. You couldn't even work in there. And that body count level was the level that we used at Rocky Flats was much lower than the national standard. So we took every precaution we could to be sure that nobody got a permanent body burden. Now there was a few occasions where guys got contaminated that they did get a body burden, and then of course they were really, they kept track of a lot of body counts, a lot of checks. Now in the beryllium side of the house, of course we done a major overhaul of the beryllium shop to be sure that the vacuum systems were proper, and of course requiring everybody to wear respirators and special clothing. And then they were tested for borreliosis too. So we pretty much kept track of everybody that was working in that kind of an environment.
How do you feel about the way the media portrayed safety at Rocky Flats?
Well, I go back to the '69 fire. And that was about the first time we ever left any media on the plant site. It was a $45 million fire. at that time, one of the largest disasters of that nature that ever happened in the United States. And because it was a fire, and because there was no indications of a fire on the outside of the building, the media they couldn't believe that you could have a $45 million fire and not scorch the paint on the outside of the building. And as a result of that, I think there was a period of a number of years that no matter what we said to the media, they didn't believe us. We had no credibility with the media at all. And because of the lack of credibility, and because of the media using their assumptions, much of the stuff that was published was tainted to a point. I think it was someone's interpretation of what they thought it was like, you know. So there was quite a time there that we really didn't get along with the media at all.
How did you feel about the protests?
Well, you naturally, because you work there, become defensive. But the protesting is an American part of life. That's a privilege that we have in this country that they don't have every place in the world. So you had to kind of understand where they were coming from. At the time, I thought it was nonsense, but yet I never got emotional about it. It didn't bother me that much because, you know, if you want to protest, go ahead and protest. I thought laying down the railroad tracks and a few things like that was bordered on stupidity, but, you know, other than that, why, I didn't have no problem with the protesters.
Did you have any direct contact with any of them?
No.
Did you participate in the pro-Rocky flat?
Oh, yeah. In fact, it hasn't been too long ago, I was looking at my T-shirt.
Oh, yeah?
Power, what, said something, I forget what it even said on it. Yeah, we had Bill Haber, yeah, was his name, was the kind of guy that led that. Yeah, we had a big group for that. In fact, you know, you talk about protests. They had, one time they formed a ring around Rocky Flats. They didn't get quite enough people to make it a solid ring. But anyway, we have a men's group that go to breakfast every Saturday morning from the church. And so somehow or another, here a couple, 3 weeks ago, we got to talking, and this one guy said, well, I formed that ring. I was part of that ring that was formed around Rocky Flats. And I says, no kidding. I says, I worked out there. He felt kind of funny about it. But, yeah, it's... but I was in that pro rally. Yeah, that was fun.
Was it a big morale booster?
I think it was. You know, you get kicked around in the newspapers, and you get kicked around by your neighbors and people you associate with. Every now and then you need something, you know, to kind of strengthen your idea of why you're doing it and what for, you know.
How did you feel when production stopped?
Well, I didn't know really what to feel for a while, but I knew, and we had so many weapons in the stockpile that there really couldn't be any need for any more. I felt strongly that we should maintain our stockpile. You know, the thing about building a nuclear weapon, there was a very, very limited amount of testing. You know, it wasn't like some electronic components that they build today that you destructively test one out of every 100 that you build to prove the reliability. We tested very few weapons, and it was something that, as I mentioned before, you hoped you never used, but if you had to use it, it better doggone well work, you know. So I was a strong advocate that we should maintain, maybe not all of them, but we should maintain a certain a number of weapons in the stockpile. But as far as building any more, you know, maybe, you know, like cars, maybe you can improve it a little bit or something like that. But, you know, some of the numbers of weapons that we built were like up in the thousands, you know. My gracious, what would you ever do with all of them? But, so I wasn't bothered by stop building them.
I'm going to skip to the end and then skip back to the beginning.
No, okay.
But I think you sort of answered this question: is how did you feel about working in a plant that produced a key part of nuclear weapons? And my follow-up to this, if you have more to say about it, you can answer it. This is whether these views changed over time.
No, I don't think it did. I was very proud of what I'd done, and I was then and am today a firm believer that the world was better off with it than it would have been without it. There's too much war and distress today in the world, in my mind. But during the 70s and the 60s, especially, I don't know what it would have been like without nuclear weapons. I think that was the one key that we in the United States had to not only to protect ourselves, but to gain a certain amount of respect in the world. So I was very proud and had no problem that way in doing what I done.
I'm just going to skip around.
Okay.
You sort of addressed a lot of my questions as you went, so the ones that we didn't get to, there's not going to be any particular order.
Okay.
You talked a little bit about that it was difficult not to be able to talk to your family about your work. I'm wondering what it was like. I don't know if you got progressively higher clearance as you went along, the whole act of being cleared and working in such high...
Well, see, I got my first clearance, Q clearance, which at that time was a pretty top-level clearance at Hanford. So I got my first clearance in 1949. And then as I went along, because of my position and my need to know, why I went to secret, and I think the highest was top secret. I never was involved in that. I didn't go that high, but some of the things that you're worried about, and and you were educated on was that if you were kidnapped, and so because of some of those concerns, I never let my curiosity go too far. I tried to know what I needed to know to do my job and do it well, but I saw no need of knowing a lot of stuff that I would never use. So I didn't delve into things that really weren't none of my business, So, but and of course, there was a long time there was a lot of foreign countries you couldn't travel to and things like that.
Oh, really? If you had the Q clearance, you weren't allowed to travel to certain places?
Yeah.
Where was that? What places?
Well, there was a time you couldn't go to the Soviet Union, and some of the Far East countries. And if you did travel outside the continental United States, you were required to tell the security department where you were going.
The security department of Rocky Flats?
Right, yeah, at Rocky Flats. So they knew, where you were at. I don't think that involved Canada or Mexico, but any place but that. You were supposed to tell them where you went. Virginia and I went to Israel and Egypt one time, and I had to tell them where I was going, and I think that's the only place I had to, because
Was that a pretty simple process? You just said, I'm going to Israel?
Oh yeah, you just went up and I think he had to fill out a form where he was going and how long he expected to be gone, and nothing, no big deal, no.
What about classification? What was the experience of having everything classified?
Well, it kind of limited you to what you could do, because for one thing, the government, the Department of Energy, required that a certain percentage of your manufacturing had to be done in the small business sector. Mm-hmm. So, you had to either work to get some components unclassified, or what we done in a lot of cases was have the most of the work in the J line or the bottle business was made out of forgings. So you would develop a phony set of drawings and have a lot of the roughing machining done off-site and bring them in for just the finished dimensions. That created a certain amount of problems, but something you had to do.
So a phony set of drawings would be?
Well, if the finished product was 1.5 inches in diameter, you would create a set of drawings that would show it 1.75 inches in diameter, which would make it unclassified because it wasn't a finished size. And then you'd have that work done outside, and then you'd bring it in and finish machine it to the classified drawings.
Sounds rather inefficient.
Yes, it was.
You had to do it outside because of the small business requirements.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
You had to do a certain amount of the work off-site.
Wow.
Of course, the plutonium work, they couldn't do that off-site, But we done a lot of our beryllium machining was done off-site. Speed ring down in Huntsville, Alabama. Done a lot of drilling, machining for us. And then I started a program at Rocky Flats to try and keep as much work in the state of Colorado as I could. So we done a survey of a lot of the machine shops here in the Denver area, Boulder, Colorado Springs, and so we would, whenever we could, we would farm stuff out to local shops. And of course, there again, you had to balance what you were doing, because if you had machinists on layoff status, the union would dispute you farming anything out because they wanted their people at Rocky Flats working rather than being on layoff status. So you had to kind of balance what you farmed out and what you didn't. And we did have some grievances filed by the union that we were farming stuff out when they had people on layoff status that we had to settle. But we farmed quite a bit of stuff out. We didn't, and of course our forgings, all of the forgings were made in Oxnard, California. We had a high energy rate forging plant out there, and that work was done out there.
So if you had plans and you take them to a classifier and say, would they tell you what you needed to do to make them sufficient to send out to a non-clear organization?
Yeah. See, the drawings, for the most part, would come from the design agencies. And then they would come to our engineering department. And from our engineer, of course, the drawings that came from the laboratories, a lot of them were kind of concept drawings, Well, then our engineering department would put them on standard engineering drawings. And then they would go, we had a processing department that would break the drawings down to how they should be manufactured. Well, at that point is when you would go to the classifiers and see if there's any possibility of getting part of that unclassified. And of course, everything that wasn't classified, there was a lot of stuff that was unclassified, even as it come from the design agencies, was unclassified. Of course, if you had anything made off-site and anything you farmed out, again, you would have to get approval from the quality department that these places that you done business with were qualified and had the proper controls to manufacture the work that you wanted them to manufacture. So it was a pretty tight process, even farming stuff out.
Okay. Now, Ed Vivoda told me a funny story about that sometimes people would produce something, write something, or I guess, produce documents, and then it would be classified at a higher level than they had clearance for, and they weren't able to read their own work. Did you ever have that sort of experience?
No, I never had that problem. Ed Vivoda there was all, when God made Ed, he threw away the mold, There's only one Ed Vivoda, a great guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved Ed. Yeah.
Okay. How do you feel about the cleanup and the layoffs that are going on? And do you think that's a good plan, and do you think it could be cleaned up the way they want it?
I'm sure that they're doing an excellent job. I don't, because of the politics, and politics plays such a big part of that place out there, always has. I don't think they can do anything but a good job, because not only is there I think they're doing a good job of regaining the public confidence. I think the people feel very good about what's going on out there, and I think that, as I understand it, that right down to the union people, that there is, if they do it right and do it on time, there's some very healthy bonuses when they're going to close the place up. So I think they're doing it right.
Again, I'm skipping around in no particular order. What was it like when women came into the shops, into the production process?
Well, there was some plus or minuses. Women, and I don't know if it was totally the women's idea or whether they were being prodded by some of the leaders of the union. But I had some real examples, some real problems. Part of the process out there was the big press shop. In 883, we had some huge presses and done a lot of forming and big dies, big heavy wrenches. The wrenches themselves weigh 50 pounds, and those were metallurgical operators was the classification. And of course, as time and things evolved, sooner or later there was ladies that were in that classification. And there was some jobs that I refused, because of safety reasons, I refused to let women do. Because, you get some of these little ladies that weigh 120 pounds, and all of a sudden, they're dealing with hot iron of 200 degrees that's white hot, and one little slip and most anything could happen. So I had some problems that way. But in the machine shop, most of the classifications, clerk packers, radiation monitors, that kind of work. In fact, you sometimes got to swallow your ego, but in a lot of places, women do a much better job, especially if the work is kind of repetitive. Women seem to be able to handle that much better than a man. So except where the work was heavy and strength became a factor, I never had no problem with women in the workforce.
Did the union give you a hard time about not letting them do the...
Oh yeah. Until, you go over there and show them and prove to them that these ladies just weren't physically able to do this kind of work, and then they'd back off. But that's the only place I had any problem.
Were there any issues with integrating women, and this may be before your time even, I'm not sure, integrating them into the facilities. I understand initially the showers there were separate showers for women, or I've heard stories about the laundry, issues with the laundry.
Well, again, that was more over on the plutonium side of the house, and that was probably before my time. But in my side of the house, we never had no problems like that. You always had the grabbers. You always had the male chauvinists that you had to deal with, and you understand that. But once you got through that Mickey Mouse kind of stuff, why, I never had any real problems.
Were there any issues with integration of more minorities into the workforce?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we never wanted to admit that we had a quota system, but everybody knew it existed. And, the first black machinist and again, human nature comes into this kind of stuff, because you'd probably the people on the floor would want to force them kind of people to prove themselves. So they would give them the most difficult tasks in hopes they would fail. And a lot of times they did, because they maybe didn't have all of the qualifications necessary to fulfill the job that they were supposed to. So there was some real problems, especially with the blacks. Not so much with the Chicanos or the Mexicans or Spanish or whatever you want to, with those people, but we did. And then of course the next hurdle you had to cross is that you were virtually told that if you had 10 foremen, one of them had to be Chicano and one of them had to be black, and that really caused some problems, because you made supervisors out of people that weren't necessarily qualified to be supervisors. Not only did you affect your workforce, you could have destroyed an individual, because if you put an individual into a job that he knows he's not qualified of handling, but that he's put there because somebody told you to put him there, that don't do the individual any good either, So there was a couple of years with the minorities that there was some real problems.
But then did it level out?
Yeah, then it leveled out, everybody began to realize, the necessity of it, why it was happening, and for the most part, 95% of the people accepted it.
Okay, just a few more questions. What were the best things about working at Rocky Flats?
There was a lot of real good things about working at Rocky Flats. I think on the most part, there was just an awful lot of good people working out there. And The hours weren't any different than working for Sears and Roebuck. I think probably the pay was a little bit above average, which always helped. But the thing, it never got bored. The challenges were there every day, the challenges along with the pressures. There was always the pressure of meeting the schedule, but there was always the challenge that it seemed like the engineering departments, the design agencies, would challenge you to whether you could build what they designed. And it was a lot of fun accepting those challenges and meeting them, But monetarily, benefits, all those things were good, but they weren't the best things working there. I think the best part of working there was the satisfaction of getting a difficult job done and done on time and under budget.
You discussed the hard things about working there, sort of the community and not wanting what you had built to be used. Was there anything else that?
No, I think those pretty well covered it. It was, you had to look beyond the psychological aspects of that part of your job and go ahead and do it.
Any other stories? Any subjects I've missed, or stories you want to share? Memories, anecdotes, that sort of thing.
Well, there's some things about the plant, that you will always remember, and some of them I mentioned. I think, the safety program that Dow Chemical had, and they had the plant broke up in divisions, and if you accomplished your safety goals, they had a place over here in, I don't know if it was in Wheat Ridge or Lake, called the Aviation Club was the name of it. Big dance hall. And they'd have a big dinner dance, and a big get-together. Those would take place maybe at the most once a year. And those kind of things you won't forget, and the change of command between Dow Chemical and Rockwell. Rockwell brought a fellow in by the name of R.O. Williams as their first plant manager, and he was quite a character. But the management club, Rockwell, see, Dow Chemical, they weren't real strong on the management club. But Rockwell was just the opposite. Rockwell was a firm believer of the management club, and if you were qualified to be and you had to be such and such a level of management to be qualified to be part of it. And those guidelines didn't come from Rockwell; they came from the National Management Association. But if you were qualified to be in the management club, you better be in it, because they believed that you should support the management club. Those were, and when they had a management club meeting once a month, and well, there'd be 400 or 500 people there. A big deal, But I don't know. I've been gone 10 years. I still think about it once in a while. I still see some of the guys that I worked with. We have a monthly breakfast. I don't go too much anymore, but it's fun every now and then to kind of renew old friendships, and but it was and I'm sure probably still is a great place to work.
I realized that one thing I wanted to ask you that I forgot, so we're going to skip around again. You talked about the 1969 fire a bunch, but I was wondering if you could just tell me maybe sort of a blow-by-blow of like when you heard about it and just a little more descriptive.
Well, at that time, see, I hadn't been there very long. The fire was in May of '69, and I started at Rocky Flats in July of '68. And I hardly knew where building 776 was. But my boss was a fellow by the name of Whitey Evans, who had worked in that building. And I kind of heard about it through him. He told me, of course it was in the papers and everything else, but, and if I remember right, it started on a Sunday, a Sunday afternoon. But, and I don't think at the time I gave it a lot of thought because I wasn't involved. But then when I went over there and was part of the cleanup and part of the restart, I gave it a lot of thought.
What did they have you do exactly for the cleanup?
Well, I didn't do any of the cleanup. When I went over there, I watched over a little of the cleanup, but my primary job when I went over to 776 was to get the machines back up going and start machining some plutonium hemispheres. And that's what I was involved in mostly.
So how did you do that?
Well, we decontaminated the areas where the machines were. And it wasn't, of course, they were all in glove boxes and everything, so it wasn't, and that wasn't part of the building that was affected the most by the fire. So we just cleaned up the machines like you normally would, and the machines were in one part of the building, and these were all numerical controlled machines, and the control units for the machines were in an entirely separate room, and the room that the control units were in never got contaminated in the fire. So we just worked hard and long and got the machines up and running and started producing some parts.
What does a numerical control mean?
Well, at that time, the machines were controlled through a unit on a tape, like a film, roll of film, but it was a tape, and the numbers that made the machine operate were punched in this tape. So that's why they called it. And the tape went through a reader which then transmitted everything to the electronics, which then transmitted everything to the machine.
So it did something repetitively that was told to do by
tape. By this numerical punch tape. So that's why they called it.
There weren't human operators.
No. Oh yeah. You had to have human operators, but the movements of the machine were controlled by the tape. But the operator had to put the parts in, take the parts out, be sure the tool was in the right location, the cutting tool. Yeah, there was a lot of operator involvement. It's just the path that the tool took to make its cut on the metal that was controlled by the tape.
Okay, got it. Okay. Another question I forgot to ask, were you comfortable with the security at the site?
Yeah, it didn't bother me at all. And I think probably that was because even at Hanford, we had a certain amount of security. Mm-hmm. So I was pretty well accustomed to it, you know.
What about in terms of breaches of security? Did it ever make you nervous that it was easy to get in and out of the building?
That didn't make me nervous. What made me nervous and what made me concerned is we had people that lost their job because they were caught by security trying to take out a $2 roll of tape or something like that, you know. I never could understand why somebody would jeopardize his knowing that you had to go through security and knowing that 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 5 or whatever it was, you'd have to open your lunchbox and show what was in it, you know. But as far as, as the guards are concerned and going through the security post and no, that never bothered me at all.
Okay. Now, did you do some consulting for Los Alamos afterwards?
No, not for Los Alamos. I done some consulting for EG&G for probably 2-3 months, something like that.
No.
Yeah.
Not with other.
No.
Okay. Well, that's it. Do you have anything you'd like to add, or any books, photos, memorabilia you'd like to show me?
No, I'm not much of
Pack rat.
pack rat like that. No.
Good for you.
Oh.
More clutter. Okay, I'm gonna turn it off and then. So thank you very much for.
Oh no, I hope I answered your questions.
Sure did.
I had. It was a few years back. The students down at community college, not community college at Denver. What is it?
Front Range Community College?
No. Anyway, they were conducting some interviews, and somebody from the plant got a hold of me and asked me if I'd go down and I'll tell you, them kids could ask some tough questions.
Oh yeah.
I really enjoyed that too. That took a couple hours, and they asked some real gangbangers, them kids.
What kind of questions did they ask?
I don't really remember now. I just remember that they kind of put me to task.
Yeah. All right. Okay, I'm gonna turn this off.